Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Zanae Dames. I'm the Marketing and Event Coordinator at Digital. I'm pleased to welcome you to Accelerating Your Organization's Success in IP Ecosystem, another fantastic subject as part of our IP webinar series at Digital. Before we get started, we respectfully acknowledge that in Canada, we live, work, and learn on the unceded traditional and ancestral land of Indigenous people. As myself and much of the Digital team are based in Vancouver, British Columbia, we are gathered here on the traditional ancestral territory of Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and we encourage you to take the moment to acknowledge and let us know in the chat the traditional territory that you are joining us from. As a quick reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed to all registrants afterwards. If at any point during the session you have a question, please type into the chat and we'll address them at the end during the Q&A portion. That's it from me, and I'll be handing it over to Jen to get this webinar started.
Thank you very much, Zanae. Bonjour, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to have attendees joining in from across the country for this month's webinar. Whether you're new or a returning participant to Digital's IP series, we're thrilled that you could join us for this Thought Leadership Power Hour. Next slide, please. 2018 saw the Canadian government launch a comprehensive IP strategy to support the commercialization of Canadian innovation and creativity and foster ecosystem growth and scaling. And more recently, Parliament has undertaken a deeper dive into how the government can better support the commercialization of intellectual property. IP and its role as a value driver for business is increasingly on the radar, with IP-backed companies more likely to experience high growth, innovate, and expand domestically and internationally. And our panel today has explored this topic with the recent release of Intellectual Property Management for Startups, Enhancing Value and Leveraging the Potential. Over these next 60 minutes, they'll share insights from their recent book and take your questions. Next slide, please. Fundamental to the global innovation clusters is collaborative innovation, setting the framework for projects that address cross-industry challenges while creating technology products and services that can scale across industries and ultimately across the world. Digital's IP strategy supports the development, ownership, and retention of Canadian IP through a number of vehicles, and informational sessions with thought leaders like we've today are one example of that. Next slide, please. I have the pleasure of introducing 4 thought leaders with us today. Please join me in welcoming David Durand, Martin Bader, Savim Suzarolu Melchior, and Lali Ramantia. David is a lawyer and trademark agent, founder of Durand Lawyers and MVIP, and is the current president of FORPIC, the International Intellectual Property Forum, Quebec. He has co-presented before the Canadian House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance regarding crypto assets and participated in other national and international consultations regarding the regulation of crypto asset trading platforms, the modernization of Ontario's capital markets, and on the transfer of personal data across borders before the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. A published author, he is a subject matter expert for the Standard Council of Canada's Canadian Mirror Committee on Innovation Management Standards and has taught courses on IP law at the University of Ottawa. Martin is a leading global authority on technology management and entrepreneurship, intellectual property management, and particularly European and Swiss patent law. He is founding partner of BGW AG St. Gallen, a specialized innovation and IP management advisory group in Europe, professor of technology management and entrepreneurship at the University of Applied Sciences Ingolstadt in Germany, and has also been the head of the Intellectual Property Management Competence Center at the University of St. Gallen, and vice president and chief intellectual property officer at Infion Technologies. An international speaker in the field of IP management, he is also a mediator at the Mediation Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution at WIPO and recognized by the IAM Strategy 300 Index amongst top intellectual property strategists worldwide. Savim is professor of digital entrepreneurship and finance and director of the master's degree program in digital entrepreneurship at the Technical University of Applied Sciences in Regensburg, Germany, and has held roles which include chief financial officer and global head of consulting at Denemeyer Group, a leading global full service provider for IP management. She's an active researcher focused on value-driven approaches to IP, an IP management consultant, appraiser in international IP valuation products, and a speaker with industry experience in numerous international innovation and IP projects with multinationals, SMEs, and startups. And last but not least, Lali, managing partner, intellectual property-backed financing at BDC Capital, who oversees and provides strategic guidance to a national team that helps IP-rich companies become global leaders by accelerating their growth and commercialization of their innovation. With nearly 2 decades of experience as Chief Financial Officer and President and Chief Executive Officer at Quantius, Vice President of Finance and Administration at Newlology and Lavalife, Lali is also currently board chair of Interaxon and associate fellow at the Creative Destruction Lab and former Canada lead for the $1 billion Fund for Women, the Information Technology Association in Canada, and Canadian Women in Communications. We have an exciting panel, and let's now start with our discussion. So Martin and Savim, I'd like to start with you both to kick off the discussion. The book explores diverse stakeholders across a variety of innovation ecosystems. Would you be able to take some moments to share with us the motivations for the book and the problem that you wanted to address?
Thanks, Jen, for the introduction. Yes, sure. We actually, Martin and myself, we are both quite a long time engaged in the IP industry, as you have noted. And at the same time, we are both lecturers in our academic world. So we are teaching management classes, we're teaching startup classes. And we noticed that there is still a very low attention to this very important topic. So that means we both in our discussions identified that there is actually kind of a vacuum in lecturing and a vacuum towards this topic, especially for small startups and small to medium enterprises. Big corporations usually have a very well developed IP management department. They have explicit staff and experts in-house, but this is not very often the case for small companies, and also not often the case in education, actually. So we ended up thinking about, setting up a book and editing a book collecting diverse views around the world from really experts, IP experts, and Lali and David are 2 of them, actually, who will talk later on. And we wanted to share our experiences. We wanted to provide diverse cases, startup cases, and also SME cases, how they deal with IP management. But at the same time, each of us have different roles. For that person, we wanted to share some or shed some light from different views. And that means we ended up with 6 stakeholder views in the book. And this is the way the book is structured, actually. And we would like to give not a guidance how to file a patent, but we want to provide a practical guidance and to give recommendations, to talk about case studies, which will be helpful to use IP strategically and to use IP to reach competitive advantage. So this is our motivation. Do you want to add something, Martin?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm happy to do that. So thank you also from my side for the nice invitation and for the possibility to exchange some thoughts across the Atlantic. I think it's we face many questions, especially with young companies or small companies like SMEs, that there is a tendency just to avoid sort of difficult questions. And if you compare that to sports, and I'm sure many of you like sports, it's always a question how to win. And the second question is how to sort of stay or remain the winning party. So become number 1 and stay number 1. And if you translate this sort of in this world here, you can maybe translate become number 1 with a great innovation and fast forward track development growth strategy, maybe even. But the second, how to stay number one, typically needs a totally different strategy. And one question is, why wouldn't you use the instruments and the tools you have available? And one of these tools we consider as IP. And that was and dealing with it. So it's a bit, know what you want to do. And second, have an idea how you want to reach it. And typically would say you can only do this if you base your decision on an informed basis. So we don't say that you need to file patents, but we would like to say that it's important to think about it, what type of legal instruments you want to use. Also the combination of, we call it factual activities. It's sort of what you do as an entrepreneur anyways, and combine it with the legal possibilities you have. And the amalgamation of both makes you strong and keeps you strong, and to think about this. And if in the end, it turns out that you only want to have a nice web page, but without infringing the copyrights of other people, which we would call risk mitigation, and respecting the rights of others, then this is fine if this is your informed basis. What we would suggest is that you avoid of taking an uninformed decision and then later being trapped by diverse issues that you didn't think of.
Wonderful. I'm wondering if we can take it sort of a bit further, sort of as you've sort of set the framework here. So, sort of from this practical perspective, how does having an IP management strategy in place help the ecosystem, both sort of from the Canadian lens that you've looked at, but also from that global lens?
Yeah, I think it's basically if like the SMEs, I think there are many SME partners here on the line. So if let's say like this, if a population in a country or in a region respects the existing rights, it probably helps to keep them sort of non-criminal, to keep them on the good side. And at the same time, and I think this is even more important, and many patent attorneys or IP attorneys forget about that, it's also to chase your opportunities. So it's not only to mitigate risk and do some administrative stuff about it, and what the entrepreneurs don't like to hear so much, but also how can you use that type of perspective to grow faster, sort of in sports, like being stronger, faster, and if you're on the first row, then to stay there, and how to use that in an amalgamated a pool of activities. And one way to do this is to set a goal and then to decide about the means how to reach it. And this is typically what we call a strategy, right? And I think maybe can add this, Jen, there is currently, and this includes also public offerings for example, innovation programs. I think Jen will be happy to share a current call from the Canadian National Research Council, NRC, that is currently supporting a joint industry research and development project between Canadian SMEs and German SMEs to foster innovation. However, the call to decide on your side, on the Canadian side, is April 28. So you have to be fast. Yeah, thanks.
And I think
would you want to add something in there too? Yeah.
And I think it's really important to mention that there needs to be acknowledgement that IP is a very valuable asset to to startups and small SMEs and small companies, and it's actually a lost opportunity if companies don't leverage this IP and don't use it actually. And also, when we talk about strategy, there's so many options. So that means the venture goes through diverse phases in their life cycle, and each of those phases needs a again, a thinking, a decision-making, which strategy to pursue, how to act, and how to position themselves on the market. And there are really plenty of strategic options, and I think David can tell us more about that as a patent lawyer, also Martin, of course. So there's always the question, how should I build up my IP? How should I handle my IP? How should I manage it? How should I use it? How should I make the most out of it? And these are a lot of questions which need to be answered. And for that reason, I think it's important that we wanted to provide some transparency and we wanted to provide some guidance, but this can only be a starting point. Creating some transparency and talking about generic or issues which are happening often and best practices.
And sort of on that, but as before we move on, was there something sort of that stood out for you from the Canadian lens, you know, as you were sort of doing sort of the research and things behind it, that was a surprise, a best practice or something that you could speak to, or maybe where there's something that, you know, we can learn from some of the other, you know, examples, you know, that may have been shared, a bit of a spoiler teaser alert for the book.
Yeah, okay, make a comment on that. I just visited Montreal as visiting scholar for 3 months and the McGill University, and I was really, at that time, I learned about all your innovation support programs that apparently seem all to include an IP perspective. So apparently your governments on provincial and or federal level have clearly understood that this is part of the game. And I think this is a difference to Europe, where the IP part is typically handled totally separately, and it's not so considered to be so fancy in competition, right? Yeah. So I think it sounds great. But
Jen, I just wanted to add a point to Martin, and I think that's what had happened when we had appeared before the Standing Committee of Science and Research on March 28th. The committee was very much looking forward to, or trying to find new models on which they can inspire themselves off of, and rightfully said by Martin, they are looking a lot towards the German government as a model to mimic in part, or to inspire themselves off of, to get more entrepreneurship and innovation policy in Canada as well. So that I just wanted to compliment Martin's response.
Perfect, thank you. And Savim, is there anything you wanted to add sort of before we jump forward?
Regarding highlights, or stories of the book, I actually like the Israeli approach, I have to say. So we have one chapter about the Israeli approach, and it's very interesting how the contributor and author explained that this richness of diverse cultures and the richness of diverse people being in one hub and creates such a flexibility and openness, and people are open-minded, and that's the reason he thinks Israel is, for example, a really big startup hub, which it is, and from his point of view, people are very aware of IP topics from beginning onwards, because they are very competitive already, and open but competitive, yeah, and that means IP assets are really part of the game there. This was a nice story, I think.
Perfect. Thank you both. And so we definitely will have questions sort of at the end as well from the audience. And so we'll switch gears a bit, but you've also kind of segued really well into sort of David's portion here as we look at sort of this focus on this crossroads between investment and IP. So putting that to you, David, walking us through demystifying, things around the investment decision-making process, and insights on the importance of integrating, a think IP mindset for establishing an IP strategy.
Thanks, Jen, for the question. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to all my co-panelists to be here as well. It's great to see everyone. I don't think I've seen a panel with so many, call it heavy hitters, from an international scope. So I think it's absolutely fabulous that Digital Supercluster put this together as well. So I want to say thank you to you first, as well as to all the others in the back end as well that made this happen. So in essence, what led to our chapter is actually quite personal, because I do see a lot of companies that have started off, 17, 18 years ago, where they were, bootstrapping, and it was very difficult to penetrate into the market and not have access to investment at certain points in their startup phase. So what we did for this chapter was try to explain as much as possible the different types of investors that exist, and also, including from friends and family, the angel investors, the venture capital and private equity, lending institutions, financial institutions, as well as the Business Development Bank of Canada that supports innovation across Canada. And what we did in our chapter was we really tried to put the point on showing what were in part the investment criteria of some of these organizations. And what we found to be the underlining or the underpinning point was that entrepreneurs and the businesses must work together towards building a relationship of trust and building investor confidence in order to become an investable vehicle from the investors, because there is absolutely no shortage in Canada of seasoned mentors, serial entrepreneurs, ultra high net worth individuals, etc. So the challenge that we found for a business owner is to help them to be better equipped to discuss the issues of intellectual property, of IP ownership, because we are, through my hat as Forpic president, we're also trying to create as much awareness for entrepreneurs and businesses to start thinking about IP. How to play, as Martin mentioned earlier, how to create the chessboard to get into the game of IP. It's something that has a lot of benefits. The research demonstrates the value of intellectual property is very important, especially as we go into an era where there's more national security concerns. We're riddled in the press of sometimes can be foreign interference, and what do we do to get more intellectual property in the mindsets of entrepreneurs. So being a lot more practical on our end, in the sense that we're looking at it from a case-by-case scenario, where we want to advocate towards a new approach that we called MVIP, which stands for Minimum Viable Intellectual Property, in a way of gaining investor confidence early on in the company's creation. So basically, what I'll just do is I'll just share my screen. And present it in the slideshow. So basically, we took it from the point of an entrepreneur, where they said in the rush to build, entrepreneurs fail to protect. And then we're looking at the Jenga tower, where any piece of the process in which an entrepreneur is going through, if any of that one of those pieces falls, then the whole company falls. And one of the other concepts that we noticed was the missteps now can have a huge consequence later. So this is what the typical entrepreneur would look like at the very beginning, as they're embarking on their journey of creating a new product, a market product fit. And they have all these different bubbles around them, saying, well, which one do I have to prioritize? Where does my intellectual property fit in? Where do I go? And so basically, by doing this MVIP approach, what we've created, or what we're advocating for, is you have the company that should be, obviously made up of the leadership team, marketing, sales, R&D, etc. But they have to be able to know, how do they interact with the other components of the innovation ecosystem, including investors, how to get government funding, how do they deal with financial institutions, how do they deal with lawyers, patent agents, trademark agents, to be able to make, call it, incisive decisions as to when to protect their intellectual property as they are executing upon their strategies and roadmaps. So I will remove that from I'll stop my share. So this is what the concept was, to build upon the core technologies of the company and take it through a Goldilocks approach, not too much, not too little, but just to find the right level of intellectual property that will be able to attain the objectives of the company, attract make it possible to have investor confidence and be able to attract investment within the company. Because investors, from our research, are very much more into the management teams of companies and to figure out if they've had proven track records, if there have been success stories in the past that would lend them to believe that they'll have a greater return on their investment as they're assisting companies. So that was the philosophy that we embarked in when drafting or when writing the book chapter that became part of Martin and Savim's book.
Okay, and if we sort of want to take that a little bit further, sort of using this approach, how do organizations, especially if we think about SMEs, strike that balance in securing that IP with limited resources that they may have, whilst enhancing competitiveness and attracting that investment sort of in practice? So if there's some nuggets you can share with us.
That's exactly the point, is that when you're engaging into call it a risk-based matrix or approach, then you're able to determine what is my core technology, and we're able to map out for the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next 3 years, 5 years, what are the milestones that have to be hit? Because in patent law, trademark law, or under any intellectual property law regime around the world, we're always touched upon by an administrative delay. For instance, if we file a PCT application tomorrow, well, we have 30 months to decide, 30 to 31 months, depending on which jurisdiction, to determine where do we go into national phase entries. So I can tell you the cost of filing a PCT application, could vary anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000, $40,000 from day one. But when it comes to if the plan is not put in place from day one, then you won't be able to absorb the cost on month number 30 when you're going to national phase entries that are, between $10,000 and $15,000 a jurisdiction. So you've just ballooned it or mushroomed the budget. But this is why, when you're engaging into the type of approach where you have an MVIP approach, that's where we're able to do the cost analysis from day one and know where the product is going to go within the next 30 months while attracting investment and also sales traction. This is I would call it the MVIP approach, in the sense that you have the entrepreneurial side, the business side, that is mixed with the law side. So it's IP and law together, or IP and business together. I apologize.
In business, and really, helps to sort of demystify that, because it can be, a big landscape to navigate, sort of, as you're trying to get started and where to start. So thank you for sharing that. I'll turn it over now to Lali. As we look sort of from the IP, the funding side of things, and from BDC standpoint. So BDC's IP investment fund is sector agnostic. It's the first of its kind in Canada, which values IP and lends against it. I'm wondering, Lali, sort of based on what we've been hearing up to this point, if you can expand on IP-backed financing and how IP puts organizations sort of in stronger positions, and what you're seeing.
Thanks very much, Jen, and good morning and good afternoon to all. So as a strong foundation, I'd want to say that obviously IP-backed financing is a very nascent way of financing companies. It's essentially defined as an investment process where the lender or investor attributes value to both the tangible and intangible assets of a company. So think of it in terms of a lot of the financing we see in the market right now is really based on the company's hard assets. So we're looking at inventory, receivables, equipment, things that are very tangible. But as the economy becomes more geared towards intangible assets, what's necessary is that we find new ways of innovating even the way we're financing companies. And that's where IP-backed financing comes in. The way we do it at the BDC is essentially working with companies that we know are all across different sectors, but understanding what makes them unique and understanding how their IP portfolio and strategy creates differentiation for them in the market. and also allows them or allows us to understand how their IP portfolio, and that's defined as their patents, trademarks, trade secrets, proprietary software and data and copyright, how all that creates not just a moat around them, but becomes an indicator of the future potential and value of the company. And so we go very deep in truly understanding what the company's technology is, how their IP strategy reinforces the strength of that technology so that they can go out to market. And as they go out to market, obviously creates a moat around their product market fit. For IP-rich companies, I think this comes as a great relief that there's another way of funding these companies. And it shows really that we are listening and that we as a funding ecosystem recognize that we need to put a different lens when we're looking at companies. And the benefits to companies having that IP awareness and IP sophistication is that now they can access, or they have more access to other forms of non-dilutive capital. And it also helps send signals to the quality of the company's creditworthiness and strength and future potential. So as an example of the last point that I made is that when a company works with a firm or a financier that's looking at their IP portfolio, then they're seeing true strength in that company that we know other financing firms don't look at. And it gives that company more uniqueness in the market, and obviously it endorses the value that they've created in their IP.
Wonderful, thank you. And if we sort of take it now sort of on an international level, sort of from the seat that you're in, how is Canada trying to use this vehicle, and how successful have we been so far to date in it?
Yep. Well, I'm happy to say that Canada is recognized as a leader in IP-backed financing. And it goes to show how we've also delivered a solution in the market that is recognized by other countries as one that is truly addressing the needs of entrepreneurs. There have been, obviously, there are other forms of IP-backed financing in the market. In the US market, you see it all the time, but I'd say in the US, there's a lot more focus on larger companies and making larger investments. In Asia, we've seen that as well. In Asia, we've seen a lot more structures where governments are essentially encouraging traditional lenders to do some form of IP-backed financing. Here in Canada, we're doing it as part of the BDC Capital IP-backed financing fund. And when we developed this fund, we had the needs of the entrepreneurs in mind. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure about is that when we launched this fund, the focus is serving the needs of small and medium-sized enterprises, which again is a very, I would say, very difficult to do for IP-backed financing, but we've found a way of doing that. And one of the ways in which we've done that is that we've integrated IP analytics and valuation techniques into the team that's making the investment decisions. The other thing that makes us very unique, and I'd say that helps us or has helped us make a mark in the market, is the flexibility in which we're making the investments. So in the BDC Capital IP-backed financing fund, we offer and work very closely with the companies to identify what their financial objectives are and can structure investment across different types of structure. So it can be a non-dilutive term loan, it can be a convertible note, it can also be a minority equity investment. So that flexibility allows us to really understand the needs of the company and provide the relevant and appropriate type of financing at the stage of development that they're in. And then the third thing that makes this I guess fund unique, which I think the recognition that we've received as well, is that we're not just lenders or financiers. we also become a partner in the company's portfolio development over time. We do require our companies to report on the progress that they've made in their IP development as part of the investment. But we also monitor the landscape and share the conclusions and the insights that we receive with our portfolio companies so that they increase their level of awareness of what's happening in the market. We routinely also have education and awareness events with our companies and really support them increase the level of IP sophistication that they have. Introduction to IP experts, like the people in this panel and then other panels, we go out of our way to make sure that we are helping the company find the right experts in their field to support them in their development. And that could be in the forms of companies who are looking to license part of their IP portfolios and making sure that they're working with the right licensing firms. And introductions to other investors. I mean, we recognize that the journey of a startup or a small or medium-sized enterprise requires a lot more fundraising down the road. And so we use our networks and our collective strength and the platform that we have at the BDC to help these companies along that journey. And then lastly, one of the key things that we also provide is the fact that in most of our companies, we sit as either directors or observers on the board. And so from that, we also make sure that there's good governance in the companies and governance from an IP perspective. We've seen instances where in some companies, we've been able to help the board understand more about what the company's IP strategy is and helping the board increase their discipline and understanding IP. So with all this, we've been recognized by the World Intellectual Property Organization as one of the leaders in this space. And we're working with them too to make sure that in the context of development banks, we find ways of spreading this investment process and making sure that we're making IP-backed financing available to a lot more countries than just Canada.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And before we move off, as many I think are sitting in the audience, sort of, wondering, how they may be able to access some of this non-dilutive financing, by leveraging sort of these asset portfolios. When, would typically they be ready for IP-backed financing, and depending on where they're at in that journey, how do they prepare themselves, to be able to access?
Good question. So I can go through what we tend to look for in terms of companies, and also a couple of tips of what we would like to see the companies be able to produce as part of an investment process. So first and foremost, I'd say if I had to describe what we're looking for in a company, it's what we call product market moat fit. So the company has to have a product or service that's being sold and accepted and taken by a market that's growing, ideally a global market that's growing, and where they have an IP strategy and a portfolio that creates a moat around their business. So easier said than done. So what does it actually mean? So the first thing is we do look for companies that have commercial revenues. IP-backed financing, especially when it comes to doing valuation, is always going to with an eye to understanding what the potential cash stream or revenue stream that you could attribute to an IP portfolio could be. So it actually is more real and it's more defensible when you actually can show what that cash stream that you can attribute to the portfolio is. And the best way of doing that is being able to say that the company's already commercialized their IP and they're already generating revenues from that. And obviously, the more sustainable that revenue stream is, the more predictable it is, and the more potential it is to grow and diversify into new markets, then the better the prospects of the company would be. The second thing we look for is what we call an emerging or established IP portfolio. So this is a scale-up solution, and so by the time we work with the companies, they've already gone, I guess, past a lot of the learnings from the book, and they've already applied and instituted those. So we like to see a mix of companies that have been very smart in using all the tools of IP strategy in order to protect their business. So companies that have patents, whether they be granted already, and then a pipeline of pending patents that shows that over time they can create more defensible moats. Always great to see. That companies that have also been smart in having a strategy where they will keep certain aspects of their business or their IP as trade secrets, and then having the right IP culture and management to protect those trade secrets, and applying best practices in order to do that. And then obviously looking at other forms of IP rights, whether it be trademarks or copyrights, and making sure that they're using them smartly as they go into new markets and going into new jurisdictions. And then for companies that may have, let's say, a lot of proprietary software and data, then having the discipline to obviously making sure that that software and data is compliant with regulations, also safe, and that where we could see a lot of monetization potential in the future. And then the third thing we look for is companies, obviously, where we've seen how that product market moat fit truly differentiates them in the market and allows them or gives them the potential to be a global leader in their space or niche. So it has to be a unique enough company that where we can see that they're solving the right problems and have the capability to solve that problem in a more global scale. And so as on a more practical basis, so what does that mean when it comes to when a company approaches us, like what do we look for? What is the process like? And I always tell, I guess, companies that IP-backed financing is actually not for the faint of heart. By nature of what we do, going deep into understanding the company's technology and an IP portfolio and strategy, we ask a lot of questions and require a lot of data. So I would say there are a couple of points I'd like companies to consider to prepare themselves. So obviously the first one is having their IP house in order, making sure the IP is well documented, that patents, let's say patents that are granted are maintained, making sure that they've got a real good audit of all their IP assets. Very important, so that when we go in and work with a company, we already understand the richness of what they've already been able to create. The second thing is being able to articulate the alignment between their IP strategy and business strategy. Easier said than done. We have companies who do a very good job of telling us the story of how they've created and developed their portfolio and why this is a portfolio that will take them into the future. And this is a very, I would say, very key point for companies that are going through a pivot. And we know in this early stage, pivots happen a lot. When a company makes a business pivot, then we also would be expecting a pivot or change in their IP strategy. So being able to articulate that is very important for us. And what we typically ask for is a company actually fill out an Excel spreadsheet where we ask them for what are your IP assets and how are those IP assets connected and supporting and protecting certain products or features that you have brought out to the market. Third thing that we like really seeing in companies are a lot of competitive awareness and analysis. When we like seeing companies who actually have a very good understanding of who their competitors are, what makes them unique, what makes them stronger or weaker, and what are the areas in which they can truly differentiate against their competition. Because when we actually go through our process, we will look at the IP portfolios of those competitors as well. And so it is with an understanding that the company needs to be IP aware, but they also need to be competitor aware. Proper data room, so that's a 4-point. Always good to have a company that's ready to go fundraise, making sure that the financial house is in order, corporate house in order, all other aspects of the business. And then the last point I want to make is access to management and access to IP experts, because we need to really understand the company's IP journey. And it's very important for us to go deep into understanding management's contribution to that IP development and what they're going to be doing going forward.
Awesome, thank you, Lali. And before we move into questions, I'd like to also, open it up to David, Savim, and Martin. Sort of what Lali's sort of been sharing from, the perspective of what's being looked at, and in your lenses, as entrepreneurs, in teaching these courses, in launching and starting also your businesses, in David's case, in advising, from a legal side, what are some nuggets that you can also sort of share in terms of things to help folks as they're preparing for these things?
Well, I think Lali pretty much hit the nail on the head, because it's always, be able to document your journey is ultra important, because you're going to be asked a lot of questions on it. They're going to, and when you're going into obviously into a data room, it's where all the skeletons come out of the closet in terms of your IP management. It's usually, the mistakes that you made on day one are the ones that will show up 5 years later or 17 years later when a company is being transacted upon or being acquired by another one. So I can only echo what Lali put forth so well.
Well, I can actually recommend to put yourself into the other side's shoes and think about what are they expecting from me from the SME. How can I prepare myself? How should I negotiate? What do they want to see? And I ask my students always, would you provide the financing? This is the question I ask them. Put yourself into this role and think about it. When would you be willing to provide a financing? And this relates to IP-backed financing, to financial institutes, but particularly to investors. So this is something I would recommend, to think about what can I offer and how well am I prepared, and do your own due diligence.
What I can add to that, add to the students also the investors and the corporations. So the investor will typically ask, what's about the next investment or even the exit? So what's that perspective? And one quote we really got from one of these statements was, it begins with IP and it ends with IP. And what is meant there, think about the next step. And it even includes the corporations. So you will see also a statement from Bayer, it's a chemical pharmaceutical company, you might know them, which stated clearly, look, it's no value for us if you talk about a global business model, but only provide us with let's say with a US patent, because the US patent only covers the US market. In pharmaceuticals, this is not considered as a global perspective. So if you have a match there, think of this in advance, and then you can also talk to the investors that you get the right budget to invest in the right portfolio. But you have to know this first, otherwise you forget you don't seize the moment when this discussion should be done, right?
Wonderful, thank you. We'll hop and we can answer a couple of questions in the Q&A. I know Dr. Bader Martin, you've answered one, and I'll put it also out to David. So there was a question that came in, is there anything that can be done to speed up timelines by patent offices? Our experience has been a 2-year review time. So I know Martin sort of has shared an insight that depending on the jurisdiction from an international perspective, in Switzerland, applications are only checked formally, so the processing time is fast. However, it's a bit different in Germany and Austria. So maybe you can expand a little bit upon that from the international side, but also the Canadian side, David, from what you've seen in practice.
So on the Canadian side, I can speak as a trademark agent, I can speak to the trademark delays. Right now, from the moment of filing to the moment that the file is actually examined, we're looking at 36 to 40-month delay. That's very long. I know the Canadian Intellectual Property Office is working very hard on reducing those delays. on the patent side, obviously, we have to look more upon the type of technology that's going to be examined by the patent examiner. In some cases, if it's a software instance, I know in one case that we were working on, it took almost 7 years to get the patent properly prosecuted, but it finally came to issue, and we're very happy it did, because that's what allowed for a fabulous exit a few years ago. And I was just going to also mention, just also being mindful of time, is that we do have a conference on May 10th, the Forum Intellectual Property Quebec, FORPIC, where we are going to be receiving fabulous speakers, including Darren Tang from the World Intellectual Property Office that will be presented by video. We have Mr. Vishal Amin as well, who is the former US administration IP czar that is being presented by the Business Development Bank of Canada. We have fabulous corporations like Ericsson that will be presenting their IP strategy to the public as well, as to how they got their IP strategy right in the telecom space. A clean tech company, E2 Metrics, will be doing the same thing, as they're a smaller company as well. And there will also be presentations that are being given in the AI space from Todd Bailey by Scale AI as well. So we have a lot of very interesting speakers that are there that want to relay how IP is used by companies, how it is leveraged. And I think it's an absolutely it will be a great experience for all the SMEs, including startups as well, early stage, to get as much IP knowledge from the same people that are at this webinar, except you'll see them in the flesh and live, and you're encouraged to ask as many questions as possible to the experts that are there.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question that we have that's come in is, our company has collaborated with a technology partner to launch a startup. Both parties contributed to the development of original software ideas. However, we haven't filed for any patents or other legal protections for the software yet. We're wondering, at the time of company formation, what constitutes our IP? Is it a legal document or the software itself? And this is a question for all of you, perhaps also from your various lenses in terms of how to approach this.
So the answer to that is the IP starts with obviously the copyright on the software, followed by whatever contractual measures you can put in place to keep it confidential as long as possible before you have a first sell to the public. That is something that is absolutely key in the software space. And after the contract confidentiality clauses wean off a little bit, right before that moment is the time that you have to follow your intellectual property, whether by patent or by filing a registration for your copyright as well. So that would be my response to that.
I would just like to add to that, obviously not knowing the particulars about the company, it's also very important to understand who are the individuals who contributed to this software, and what assignment of rights you may have received from them. Obviously, these are things that are usually put in either employment agreements or contractor agreements.
And from a strategic point of view, maybe I can also add, it's also the question to begin, what do you want or need to own to run your business? And so it's from a strategic point, not a good issue. If the other owns something that you need, it might put you in an awkward situation. So typically would say, try to own what you need and to clarify this. And if you have a sort of a gray zone now, an unclear situation, it might be a consideration to clear the situation. Yeah.
Wonderful. And I know there's a sort of a question that's just come in sort of around sort of the IP-backed financing. I think Lali will be able to share sort of some specific links for folks to direct them, but maybe we can put out a question sort of specifically around sort of BDC in terms of, you know, is there sort of partial ownership of the IP as a condition for financing? A question to you, and then a question to, you know, Martin and Savim as well from the European side. You know, what are you seeing something similar sort of from that angle as well?
Right. So from the perspective of the BDC Capital IP-backed financing fund, when we make, let's say, a loan to a company, we will secure against the company's IP portfolio. So we don't take ownership of it outright, but it is held as security or collateral for the loan. Obviously, when we're in a position where we're an equity holder, we participate similarly to all the other shareholders of the company. But where it does make a difference is that when we do provide non-dilutive term lending, then it is secured against the company's IP portfolio.
From the European or German perspective, as we don't have such a program, which is similar in Germany, we have actually what we have is we have IP vouchers, we have IP subsidies, we have IP grants, which are possible for small companies to receive. And besides that, for big corporations use big banks actually to lend money. This is also very common. But funnily, I have just next week, I have a speaker who is from a regional bank in Regensburg, and the bank is big in Germany, actually. So I asked him about IP-backed financing, and I asked him, could you tell me, do you have anything in your program? And he said, no, of course. And just to add to Lali's actually presentation, I think one big issue is really that the IP capabilities, IP analytics and IP valuation capabilities are not there. So this is really a big issue, I think. So think about it. If you would scale it up, such programs, you would need really to make sure that those institutions are more knowledgeable regarding IP, and they need to build up. And this is, I think, quite an effort and quite a great job what BDC did here.
Perfect. Martin, yeah, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I can quickly add a comment to that. In Austria, so not in Germany, but in Austria, there is an institution called AWS, Austria Wirtschaftsservice, and they also worked with IP-backed finance services. Typically, you can always say if you have no cash streams that are based on your IP, the more difficult it gets. And the more cash streams you have, that can be your copyright, for example, if you're already licensing out stuff, then it's much more easy, or it's a much better level to find partners to talk to. So follow the money, that's what it is.
Follow the money. So kind of before we close out, I know we're kind of coming up to the top of the hour, is, you know, what would be sort of that one last final takeaway that you want to leave with the audience? And I put that out to all of you to sort of share your closing thoughts before we close out for this session. David?
Well, mine is attend FORPIC 2023. I put the link into the chat, and I would gladly see everybody in Montreal. And thank you, Jen, for putting this together, and the digital supercluster as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And to the rest of our panel, any final burning thoughts, wise words?
I'd like to add that it's never too early nor too late, and you're never too mature or too newbie to think about having an IP strategy. It doesn't have to be a very sophisticated document or plan. It can be as simple as a one-pager. But I think it's important to really think about how you're going to be generating IP, how you're going to be protecting it, and how you're going to be able to monetize it in the future.
I would like to quote some of our authors who said, in a nutshell, take IP seriously and don't miss out opportunities. That's really a big message what they gave us in this book.
I comply to that.
Wonderful. Well, before I hand it off to Zane to close us out on behalf of Digital, would like to extend a huge thank you. Dankeschön, merci, and really carving out time with our members this afternoon, this evening, wherever they are. I know we have a global audience tonight, so thank you very much for that. And Zane, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you to our panelists for attending and to our attendees in the audience. I will be loading the recording of the webinar onto YouTube, and that'll be available. If the panelists have any resources that they would like to share with us, we can also send that out to the attendees afterward. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.